You trying to read the labels of the books over there?
Yeah, I could read them all. What is that, Encyclopedia Britannica's back there?
Right.
They're useless today.
That's for sure.
Actually, Dominic was doing a project for school, and his project was to find an encyclopedia in the house, look up a word, and he had to actually show the book and read the definition to his teacher to get credit. Wow, was that hard to do?
Yep.
Julia, are you ready?
Who has encyclopedias?
Yes, I am,
We don't have
Mayor.
encyclopedias.
We did.
Call the meeting to order. Clerk, call the roll.
Trustee Garvey. Trustee Zalick.
Here.
Trustee LaRocca.
Here.
Trustee Geezer.
Here.
Trustee Fruzzoloni.
Here.
Trustee McCarthy.
Here.
Mayor Severino.
Here, please stand and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag
Flag
of
of the United States of America.
And
To the republic for
which is
which
stand
it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible.
indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Before we get started, I have a statement I'd like to read. We are conducting this meeting of the mayor and the board of trustees in accordance with the recently amended provisions of the Open Meeting Act. The governor's disaster proclamation reissued November 13, 2020, and the governor's executive orders. Based on the disaster proclamation and the executive orders, it has been determined that an in-person meeting is not practical nor prudent at this time. Therefore, the meeting is being conducted in a virtual conference format. Is there anybody for the listening post? Tia?
We have received no.
Sorry, we have to approve the minutes. Is there a
Correct.
motion to approve the minutes of our January 18, 2021 village board meeting?
So moved, trustee McCarthy.
Second, trustee Fruzzoloni.
Moved by trustee McCarthy, seconded by trustee Fruzzoloni.
Clerk, call the roll.
Trustee Garvey. Trustee Zalick.
Aye.
Trustee LaRocca.
Aye.
Trustee Geezer.
Aye.
Trustee Fruzzoloni.
Aye.
Trustee McCarthy.
Aye.
Tia, was there any addresses from the audience?
I have received no electronic submittals.
With that being said, I'd like to start the meeting. So see where we are here. Is there a motion to establish a consent agenda?
So moved, trustee Geezer.
Second, trustee Zalick.
Clerk, call the roll.
Moved by trustee Geezer and seconded by trustee Zalick. Trustee Garvey.
Aye.
Trustee Zalick.
Aye.
Trustee LaRocca.
Aye.
Trustee Geezer.
Aye.
Trustee Fruzzoloni.
Aye.
Trustee McCarthy.
Aye.
Madam Clerk, would you please read what is on the consent agenda?
Staff reports and recommendations. Recommendation to award an extension of the contract with H&H Electric for emergency streetlight repair services with a 1.4% price increase for the period of May 1st, 2021 through April 30th, 2022, pursuant to the provisions of section 5-8-3B and subsections 5-8-14N of the Village Code of Ordinances.
Yes.
Yes.
Motion to approve and authorize the village manager to execute an urban and community forestry grant and subaward agreement with the Morton Arboretum Project number 0827-03. Approval of a motion authorizing the village manager to execute the attached 2020 to 2022 urban and community forestry grant agreement and sub-agreement with the Morton Arboretum in the amount of $20,000 and designate the Director of Public Works, Phil Modaff, as authorized designee for the village.
Yes.
Yes.
Microsoft Software Enterprise Agreement, MSEA, awarding the contract for purchase of the year 2 Microsoft software renewal to Dell Marketing LP in the amount of $33,788.74.
Yes.
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 Resolutions. Number one, resolution accepting a plat of grant of public water main easement and private water main and sanitary sewer easement, 27 West 371 North Avenue, for water and sanitary purposes that will benefit a future development of the 2 North 275 Morton Road property.
Yes.
Yes.
That is resolution number 3171. Number two, resolution declaring surplus designated police department items as attached in exhibits A and B of said resolution.
Yes.
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 That is resolution number 3172. Payment of bills. Number one, regular bills, January 19th, 2021 through February 1st, 2021.
Yes.
Yes.
Number two, addendum warrants, January 19th, 2021 through February 1st, 2021.
Yes.
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 Treasurer's report, revenue expenditure statements and balance sheet for the month ended December 31st, 2020.
Received.
Received.
Is there a motion to approve those items by unanimous vote?
So moved, trustee LaRocca.
Second, trustee McCarthy.
Mr. Mayor, you need a motion to place those on the consent agenda first.
Is there a motion? Sorry about
Make a
that.
motion to put the items on the consent agenda.
Second, trustee Garvey.
So moved by trustee Fusiloni and seconded by trustee Garvey.
And then you guys.
And trustee Garvey,
Yes.
Yes.
trustee Zalick,
Aye.
trustee LaRocca,
Aye.
trustee Geezer,
Aye.
trustee Fusiloni,
Aye.
trustee McCarthy.
Aye.
Now, is there a motion to approve those items by unanimous vote?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by trustee LaRocca, seconded by trustee McCarthy. Trustee Garvey,
Aye.
trustee Zalick,
Aye.
trustee LaRocca,
Aye.
trustee Geezer,
Aye.
trustee Fusiloni,
Aye.
trustee McCarthy.
Aye.
Okay, report of officers. How about Tom Garvey? Start.
I have no report this week, Mr. Mayor.
I don't know if you heard you.
I don't have any report this week, Mr. Mayor.
Very good, thank you. John, trustee Zalick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I want to thank Phil Modef and his Public Works Division. The snow we had was the most snow we've had in 5 years at one time, and our streets were great. I went to other jurisdictions and not so much, so we're very spoiled with the street division and the Public Works. Second of all, I want to thank PAC 458 and den leader Jill Novacek. She asked for me to join one of their den meetings because they were learning about how to build a better world through citizenship and public service. So I was able to speak to the young gentlemen. They had great questions. A lot of them had to do with the police and public service, but one even asked if we have term limits here in Carroll Stream. So I was quite impressed. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to those young gentlemen. And finally, the Citizen Police Academy, a reminder that it starts on February 18th. The deadline is to sign up is February 11th. Call Officer Carol Cadle at the Carroll Stream Police Department with any questions. Topics will include various law enforcement topics, including the use of force, which is pretty prevalent now in the news. And that ends my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, trustee Zalick. Trustee Geezer?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I also would like to congratulate and thank Public Works staff for all the great work they did on the roads. Like trustee Zalick, I was in other communities and they weren't as good. So our Public Works Department continues to do stellar work. And it was great to see so many residents out helping their neighbors. You know, so if you have a snow blower, do what you can, help who you can, and try to get your sidewalks done as well. And while you're at it, shovel around your fire hydrants. Time matters if there's a fire in your area. So, and don't forget, tomorrow is Groundhog Day. So do we want to see a shadow or do we not want to see a shadow? Which one do we want? Okay, we just don't want another repeat of last year, though, right?
It's supposed to be sunny, so it's.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
That is my report, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, trustee Giesner. Trustee LaRocca.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Kind of follow up on trustee Zalek's comment and trustee Geezer's comment about the snowfall. Well, winter is definitely here. A lot of snow in a short period of time. And I'm thankful to my neighbor, Brad Chandling, who lent me his snow blower so I could snow blow the driveway. I sure do miss my snow plow. And so does everyone else in my cul-de-sac. But if you have elderly neighbors, check in on them. As this weekend, what the bottom's going to fall out of the temperature, and it's supposed to be single digits to 0. So check on your elderly neighbors and give them a hand if they need it. Just stay safe and stay healthy. And thanks again to Public Works for doing a good job plowing snow. That ends my report.
Thank you, trustee LaRocca. Trustee Frizzaloni.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Like everyone else, amazing job by Public Works. This was probably, with this storm, we probably saw the most public comments on social media thanking our Public Works Department, and it showed. When they were showing the news on Sunday morning, even at 10 o'clock in the morning, they were showing Geneva, the side streets, and they're like, Public Works are never gonna get to side streets. And I looked outside, I go, our pavement's wet. So we're doing really good. So, I mean, amazing job. Our guys were out 16, 18 hours without a break, and then went home, got a little bit of sleep, and had to come back out last night because we got just enough snow for the salt crews to have to come out. So great job, Public Works. I've already sent them my thank you. They do such an amazing job. So thank you to them, and also to our police department. When we have snowfalls like this, Public Works and police work in tandem together. So thank you to our police department as well. It was a very tough shift, I'm sure, for the police department. Sunday morning, I was contacted through Facebook by a resident that I've never met, and she was asking for help with her driveway. So I reached out to someone I know that does snow plowing, and he said, yeah, I can get to it, but it's gonna take a couple hours. And then I got the idea. I have a teenager. So I asked my son, hey, there's a woman that needs some help shoveling her driveway. And without hesitation, my son and his friend John and his friend Jake and his friend Caden all said, absolutely. They grabbed snow shovels, came to my house. We drove over to Newport Village and dug out 3 driveways. It was absolutely amazing to watch these 4 16-year-olds without hesitation jump in to help out neighbors in need, complete strangers they had never met. One of the kids had never shoveled snow before, so it was kind of interesting to have to teach him how to use, well, his parents have a snowblower. And I said, we don't have time to grab a snowblower, nor do we have a car to throw a snowblower in, so let's just go, we can do this. The 2 women that we talked to, one neighbor borrowed us an extra snow shovel so we could do her neighbor's driveway, which was really nice. And all she asked is, can you do the bottom of my driveway? Which the boys were happy to do. They did the sidewalks, they did everything. I just want to say I am so incredibly proud of those 4 boys, because honestly, they turned down money. Both women were generous and they wanted to pay them. And the boys all said, no, we're just doing it because Mrs. Frizzaloni asked us to, and it's no problem. So I owe them pizza. So I just want to say I'm very proud of my son. I'm very proud of his friends. I posted a picture on Facebook of these 4 amazing young boys. And you know what? If that's what our future looks like, it's awesome. Today I had the honor of, actually I was invited by my old elementary school in Buffalo Grove, St. Mary's in Buffalo Grove, to speak at a online career day. And I got to talk about being a village trustee, which was really cool. Kids asked some great questions, kind of like you got. And because Buffalo Grove is a very similar size, it was easy to relate to how their local government works, because they're very similar to Carroll Stream. So it was an honor to be able to speak to them. I want to touch on something that trustee Zalik had talked about and something that our police department actually posted on their Facebook page today. You were talking about the Citizens Police Academy, and one of the topics is use of force. And I just want to read this, that today, the Carroll Stream Police Department has received a federal use of force certification through the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, assuring that our policies and procedures comply with federal use of force guidelines. This certification means that an independent body has reviewed and assessed our department policies in meeting U.S. Department of Justice guidelines. That's pretty important. In today's environment, I think it speaks volumes to the professionalism of our police department. And I want to thank our chief and our police department. That's not an easy certification to get, and it's a federal certification, so that means an awful lot. Lastly, speaking about the police, and I know that trustee Zalik had brought up the current criminal justice reform bill that has been in the news. There is a public event that is being hosted this Wednesday by the Carroll Stream Community Activist Group. They have a Facebook event that you can go in and you can sign up for. One of the bill for Bill HB 3653, one of the bill co-sponsors, Representative Ann Stava Murray, is actually going to be doing a panel discussion, and she will be doing a Q&A afterwards. So because this has been in the press a lot, anyone who's interested in learning more about this criminal justice reform bill or has questions, please join this Facebook event. It is this Wednesday from 6:30 to 8 p.m. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I will end my report.
Thank you, trustee Frizzaloni. Trustee McCarthy.
I'm going to go ahead and say ditto on everything with what a great job Public Works did. And seeing how many people got out and helped their neighbors and friends or people down the street was wonderful to see and watch and be part of. The only thing I ask everybody, please don't snowblow or shovel your snow from your driveway out into the street. When I was driving, I did run into a few of those, and it's like a ice speed bump, and it can become a pretty big safety hazard. As trustee LaRocca said, the temperature is supposed to bottom out this weekend. So anywhere you've got some wet spots with the sun coming out today, you might want to throw some salt on it or get it shoveled up, because once it gets below zero, salt's not going to help a real lot. It's still going to stay slippery, and it's still going to stay dangerous. So really this week is the time to get it out and get it done. With that, that's the end of my report.
Thank you, trustee McCarthy. Julia Swarzi, our clerk, do you have anything you'd like to put in there?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I wanted to speak to what trustee Zalik was talking about in terms of the CPD program, the Citizens Police Academy. My daughter and I did that program 2 years ago and just learned so much from it. And it was amazing to me that it opens up your eyes to the other perspective, because what you see on the news so often is one-sided. So she and I got a lot out of that program, and she's studying criminal justice at Lewis University. And so it was a really good program for her. So I recommend it highly to everybody. I also want to just say, in honor of Black History Month, I'd just like to read a quote by an African-American investor named Robert F. Smith. He said, "Use your skills, your knowledge, your instincts to serve, to go change the world in the way that only you can." And then lastly, I want to say, please shop Carroll Stream.
There it is.
There it is.
Thank you.
Thank you, clerk. Our attorney, Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My only comment is to congratulate Chief Homer and the Carroll Stream Police Department on receiving their certification on use of force through the Illinois Law Enforcement Accreditation Program. It's a great program and a great honor for the Carroll Stream Police Department, and everyone should be proud of the fact that they received that certification. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Village Manager, Bob Meller.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of updates on the pandemic and what the village is doing regarding the latest governor's order. Last week, the governor moved DuPage County to Tier 1 mitigation measures, allowing for larger group gatherings and restaurants to open to the lesser of 25 guests or 25% overall room capacity, both indoors or outdoors, whichever is less. On the other hand, the DuPage County Health Department advised that the positivity rate, medical bed availability, and ICU bed availability metrics continue to elicit concern in Region 8, which includes DuPage County, as well as Kane County. Out of concern for our employees and the residents, we've decided to keep the municipal center closed this week, and we're going to reassess the metrics and the positivity rate during the coming week. It appears that DuPage County in particular is doing very well regarding the number of deaths and the number of positive cases of COVID. So we're hopeful that we can open up the municipal center. In the meantime, we continue to serve our residents remotely or by appointment. A lot of times we'll see somebody at the front door and not knowing that we're closed down. So if we see them, we'll come out, meet them in the vestibule and serve them that way. So I think residents have been very understanding during this time period. Also attended the DuPage County Health Department's weekly Zoom update this morning. They have that every week on Monday. Their goal is vaccination of 80% of the county's population. That equates to 572,210 residents. So the current allocation of vaccine averaged 13 to 14,000 doses per week, which will take a long time given that rate. It's about 42 weeks to get everybody vaccinated at the 80%. So vaccines have been administered to a little over, well, almost 72,000 DuPage County residents, and almost 20,000 were fully vaccinated with 2 doses. DuPage County vaccination data can be found on the Illinois Department of Public Health website. DuPage County is currently outperforming the other collar counties in terms of number of vaccinations, which is good. I think the DuPage County Health Department is doing an excellent job. A lot of it depends on the vaccine availability. If Illinois can't get it, then that restricts the number of people that can be vaccinated. Phase 1B is estimated to take 10 to 12 weeks without an increase in supply. So at the current rate that we're getting at, transition to phase 1C, which is residents between the ages of 16 and 65 with underlying health conditions, will occur when demand decreases, vaccine supply increases, or a combination of the two. Allocation of vaccines are not known until the week before and have varied from a little over 5,000 doses to almost 24,000 doses week to week. So it's very unpredictable. There are 96 state-approved providers who have met requirements for administration of the vaccines in DuPage County. So that includes a lot of the pharmacies, Walgreens, CVS. It includes the DuPage County Health Department, as well as your own doctors and hospitals in DuPage. So, and that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. My report will be short. I just want to thank the Public Works Department, the Police Department, and congratulate Chief Homer on yet another award or another high classification for our police department. Being we're closed another week, it's something we've talked about. We've been able to maintain a healthy posture in our office. We have to be very careful because we are a service company. And if we get sick, I don't know who would run the village. It would be very interesting to see what would happen. Locking it down and kept everybody separated and shifting in and out of different departments. Some work, some stay from home and flip-flop. We've been able to really get lucky for the whole year. And when you look back at this last year, what we've gone through, we've been able to provide service for 40,000 residents and all those people in the industrial park because we made all the right moves. I want to thank the staff for that because they always lead us in the right direction, and the trustees for following through and doing always trying to do the right thing for the people and the businesses in Carroll Stream. So I want to say thank you for that. Rather than end the meeting, am I gonna close this meeting out and go right into the budget meeting? Are we gonna adjourn here?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so basically I'm done. I'm gonna make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
Moved by trustee Bruzaloni and seconded by trustee McCarthy.
Clerk, call the roll.
Trustee Garvey.
Aye.
Trustee Zalek.
Aye.
Trustee LaRocca. Trustee Giesers.
Aye.
Trustee Bruzaloni.
Aye.
Trustee McCarthy.
So now we're gonna open up our budget workshop meeting, February 1st, 2021. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, Mr. Baytek, look at John, he got a tie on and everything. I didn't get a tie, I'm sorry. Okay, so I'm gonna turn this meeting over to our finance director, John Baytek. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening, everybody. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you in person tonight. Circumstances beyond my control, as it were, but happy to be with you nonetheless. I am going to kick off the PowerPoint presentation here, so bear with me one moment. I'm going to try and get to that. Let's see. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Yep.
Fantastic. That's good for the first step. Now, can everybody see the presentation on full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, can anybody still see me?
No.
No.
Oh, yes, no?
I could see you and the presentation.
Time for me to disappear, so I'm just going to go back to the black box if I may.
Okay,
Okay. Well, what an interesting year it's been, obviously. We've said that a lot over the last 10 months. What we've prepared for you this evening is a very high-level review of our general fund. And central to our discussion certainly is the impact that the pandemic has had on the budget, including where we see things heading into our next fiscal year, which begins this coming May 1st. I'll stress at this point that the budget in its current form is still a work in progress, so we're not done by any means. Toward the tail end of my comments this evening, we've identified some options that we feel will provide a sustainable path forward for the village into the coming year, certainly amid continued uncertainty. At that point, we're going to pause and hopefully we'll seek some feedback and input from the village board as to what we feel collectively are the best approaches to our new fiscal year. And following the discussion this evening, we'll refine the budget draft document and follow up with a much more detailed proposal for your review at a workshop at a later date, probably in March. So with that, I'll begin with a quick review of our current fiscal year 21 performance. And we'll start with a discussion of revenues. Projections of total revenues for the current fiscal year are $680,000, or about 2.3% above our original budget forecast. This is also 3% above last year's revenues in fiscal 20. This type of performance in revenues is very much like what we would hope to see under normal circumstances, with some natural revenue growth keeping in step with expenditure inflation. Of course, this performance is largely driven by a one-time receipt of nearly $2 million in CARES Act reimbursements during the year, which begs the question, what's been the impact on the revenue sources that we rely upon year in and year out to fund village operations? This is what our current year fiscal 21 estimated revenues look like with that CARES Act funding removed. So what we see here is a total decrease of $1.3 million, or about 4.5% below our original budget, and nearly 4% less than actual revenues received in the last fiscal year. Moving to impacts on specific revenue streams, there certainly you see a lot of red on this page. There are very few revenue sources which were insulated from the pandemic. And really, it's the related economic slowdown that began starting last March. So I'd like to spend a couple minutes on some of these items just to give you some examples of what we're seeing. I'll begin with the property tax, which is on the top line. We're showing actually a positive budget variance, a very small one, 0.3%. Since this is new to us here at the village, I thought I'd just point out why it's a little bit more than what our $3.8 million levy from last year was adopted at. Each year, the county adds 1% to our approved levy as an allowance really for uncollectible taxes. So at the end of the day, we wind up collecting about 100% of what the levy that was requested by the village board. So you see that here, so it's about 0.3% over. So meaning about 70% of that extra 1% has been used up. We call it levy breakage, levy spoilage, or uncollectible taxes. Moving to the next two lines, we see sales taxes and home rule sales taxes. I'll just attack that together. I'm going to speak a little bit more about this in depth later, but the only thing I wanted to draw your attention to, combined, they're about $460,000 below our budget expectation. I wanted to focus some attention here on the reasons why these are kind of divergent. So regular sales taxes down by about 1.7%. Home rule sales tax fared much worse. The reason for that is there are certain items that aren't subject to our home rule sales tax, mainly automobile sales and many grocery items are not. The fact of the matter is actually those two sectors of our community, auto sales and groceries, did very well in 2020 compared to 2019, or actually the current fiscal year, 2021 versus fiscal 20. So those sales appear in the sales tax number, the base sales tax, and they don't appear in home rule sales tax. So that's why there's a bit of divergence in these two revenue sources. Moving on to the local use tax, this is tied largely, and this is essentially sales taxes in another format. And it's really tied largely to remote online sales. So that money comes to us by and large through out-of-state retailers selling into Illinois where there's no physical presence in the state of Illinois. These taxes, certainly they grew by 9.2% over our budget estimate, but they have been booming for a number of years with the rapid increase in internet sales, and no surprise to anybody on the call here that that has skyrocketed further upward during the pandemic. You can pretty much buy anything delivered to your front door these days. So pre-pandemic, the local use tax has grown by 16% in each of the last 2 years. And for this year, we're projecting it to be about 23% gain over fiscal 20 last year. So that's performing quite well for the reasons I've stated. This next one, income tax, it's a very significant revenue source to us. And this is surprising probably to many of us because we've kind of had a rough go with income taxes over the last, decade, because it comes from the state of Illinois and it's shared to us on a per capita basis. The principal reason this is outperforming the budget, this may come to a surprise, but the state, you've heard me speak on this on numerous occasions, over the last 3 years, the state has taken over a portion of that income tax set aside for municipalities and used it for their own use. This year, they did not do that. So we projected in our budget that we would lose about 5% from the state takeover. That didn't happen when they passed the budget last year. So that's why our revenue experience is showing better than our budget. That's the main reason. Other factors are the job market, certainly unemployment still remains high, but it's not as bad as it was originally expected. Federal stimulus payments programs, not just through the CARES Act, but the Paycheck Protection Program, and those stimulus efforts have propped up incomes and have been helpful. Also, income tax is not just personal income tax, it includes corporate income taxes as well. So those are some of the factors driving that experience. I'll kind of get a little bit shorter in the mouth here, but so the alcohol taxes, the hotel taxes, video gaming taxes, there's no surprise here that these have declined significantly during the pandemic. Alcohol taxes primarily through, obviously, restaurants unable to serve dine-in customers has been impacted since the start of the fiscal year. Hotel taxes, probably definitely the largest, deepest cut, almost 70% decline this fiscal year compared to last, as tourism is obviously dried up. People just are not going anywhere and they're not staying. That has moderated very, very slightly since the first wave of the pandemic from March to, say, June. It's moderated some, but it's still down significantly. The video gaming tax, no surprise there either. The terminals went dark in March and they were not activated again, I believe, until June 1st. And then I think the state did the same action in November again. I believe they're operating now since we moved, I think, to tier 1 mitigations January 26th. So we're seeing a big hit there. It may not be quite pronounced here. In my original estimates, I predicted that they would resume operations in March, but they've come in a little bit earlier. So it won't be quite this bad, but still 50% decline is pretty significant. Licenses and permits, charges for services. These include things like building permits. While number of permits may not be too far off, but the larger permits haven't been producing. You recall we also gave a break on liquor licenses for restaurants earlier in the year. That's reflected in this number. Fines and forfeits. Certainly there's been a lot reduced activity. Courts and whatnot, towing fees in the early part of the fiscal year. There's just been a lot of reduced activities. Interest income is another one that took a very significant dive almost instantaneously with the onset of the pandemic. Interest rates are basically, for all intents and purposes, at zero at this stage of the game. And the Federal Reserve has not projected those to come back in any meaningful way in years. It'll be years before that recovers. So here you kind of see the reconciliation with without the CARES Act. And then when you add the CARES Act money in, there's our 2.3% increase. So the end result is actually pretty good, but all of this right in here obviously covers a lot of the impacts caused by the pandemic. I thought I'd just throw in a quick side note here. You recall during the property tax public forums in 2019, we were seeking a revenue in the general fund that provided added stability. I just wanted to reinforce that this has been achieved in small part by having this revenue source be allocated to the general fund. And part of the program and part of the proposal last year was we would move this basket of revenues, the electric utility tax, the real estate transfer tax, and telecommunications taxes, to the capital projects fund as a dedicated revenue source there. Had we not done that, we would be facing an additional $170,000 loss from these three revenues in the general fund this year. So having the property tax in the general fund has provided some of that buffer that we were looking for. And as I've said at the bottom here, the capital projects fund has a lot more flexibility than we do in the general operating fund to kind of scale projects and to deal with the good and the bad in terms of trying to plan on a longer term horizon there. This is the same thing, just shown graphically. The red represents the CARES Act funding, and then 5 years of prior year revenue history. You can see we're operating just below what our actual revenues were in fiscal 19 without the CARES Act fund. So our revenue base has taken a hit, but it could have been much worse. And we're looking for some recovery into fiscal 22. So there's some good news on the horizon. On the expenditure side, we have a much more significant variance against budget. We are looking to come in at about $2.5 million below budget. And that's 8.8% is a very significant swing. That is part due to some planned activities, and some of it was just handed to us. I've listed here, in May, staff came up with a list of about $2 million in cuts and deferrals and freezes and things. We've since revisited that in light of receiving CARES Act funding, but a lot of those items still can't be completed within this fiscal period. So we did that obviously right out of the box when we knew we were going to have some economic impact due to COVID. Things that are not necessarily within our direct control that contributed greatly to this amount under budget, retirement and staff turnover continue to be fairly high. I said down here, 1 in 25% of our workforce has turned over in the last 3 years. So we obviously expect that this is going to slow at some point, and we'll need to address that downstream. But those are the savings that, part again planned to try and keep the budget in balance, and then part is just kind of handed to us. There's a lot of numbers here. I'm really not going to spend much time here. The only point I'm trying to make here is with this budgetary savings of $2.5 million, almost exactly half of that comes from payroll and benefits costs, and then the other half comes from the remaining categories of contractual services, commodities, and capital outlay. So on the payroll, salaries and wages side, again, 1.2 million, almost $1.3 million below budget. I'm not going to read this to you. You've already had a chance to read it. And I've listed really a lot of the positions that are high profile, that have been vacant for all of the year, a portion of the year, or turned over during the year. You haven't seen it yet, but when you do see the final proposed draft budget, you should not be surprised to see a number of departments where their entire budget request for fiscal 22 is actually lower than their 21 budget. And in many cases, it's due to some of the staff turnover that's taken place, long-term employees retiring, and we're starting with newer employees with lower salaries. On the all other categories as well, almost $1.3 million below budget. And again, some of this was planned. So take the tree maintenance deferral of $66,000. That was planned. That was part of that $2 million list. Some of it was not planned. Training under pandemic conditions, if trainings weren't canceled altogether, in many cases they're virtual, so we're saving costs on travel and lodging, things of that nature. And then DUCOM and our GIS consortium also provided a break for dues and subscriptions to those agencies in light of the COVID pandemic. So that has gone to the benefit of the village during this year as well. So when you add it all up, you look at revenues over budget by $680,000 and expenditures below by $2.5 million. We're looking at actually a sizable surplus for this current fiscal year of about $3.2 million, which is interesting considering where we've been over the last 12 months. Thus, I think the point can be made that even without the CARES Act funding, we still would have ended up with a surplus of about $1.2 million. That's about 4% of the total budget. And that figure is actually more or less, what we might expect again during a normal non-pandemic year. So the CARES Act funding really saved the day and really is one of the major contributors to the projected budget surplus, not to mention the expenditures, obviously, that came in below budget. Okay, moving on to what the plan looks like for fiscal 22 at the present point. Starting with revenues, I made a comment here. I think the pandemic will largely dictate how economic recovery takes place. The speed at which we're able to get people vaccinated, the speed at which we can try and have life return to normal as we know it, will certainly have a very large impact on the budget and revenues next year. I made a point here that early on in 2020, in March and April, there were a lot of projections of severe, deep recession. That didn't really materialize. One of the things that I think is really positive that came out of that is that businesses, even under lockdowns and restrictions and whatnot, certainly have been very much hurt. But they've innovated and they've adapted to what life under a pandemic is like. So much now is becoming touch-free, curbside. All of that stuff had to be kind of retooled so that businesses could continue to survive during this environment. Again, the federal stimulus programs have also helped prop up the economy. Unemployment, again, is not as bad as what it was now as it was at the onset of the pandemic. Certainly the pandemic has had a very disproportionate effect and financial impact on various groups. Generally lower wage positions have been hit the hardest. Hospitality industry being one of them, really got slammed. One other positive factor I think we could look forward to is personal savings during this time may signal a lot of pent-up demand for goods and services once the pandemic does begin to subside. Probably more on the service sector again, because most people can purchase goods and have them delivered doorstep within 24 hours generally. For the first cut of revenue projections for fiscal 22, I'm showing forecasted recovery of about 2.9% over our estimated year-end revenues, excluding the CARES Act funding, of course. We do not anticipate that to repeat. We're not counting on stimulus from the government to balance the budget next year, and I don't think we should. If we put it another way, we're looking at making up about 60% of the revenue shortfall from the 21 budget next year. And so we're looking, hopefully, fiscal 23, another year out. Hopefully, we're looking at the first full, dare I say, pandemic-free fiscal year. So we're hopeful that revenues will continue to bridge the gap into that next year, fiscal 23. And again, I've thrown on the projection for FY22 revenues on that same slide as before, showing again some recovery, a lot of recovery over the original budget, but not quite making it to where we were in fiscal 20 as far as actual revenues are concerned. This is still in a state of flux. We're going to have to continue to tweak and look at the forecasts over the next several weeks. I've noted on this slide that we're waiting for projections that the Illinois Municipal League provides every year. And as it always seems to occur, the morning after I finalized the presentation, the IML had released the new projections. So we have those in hand now, and there's some good news on that front. The IML does projections throughout the year. The most recent data they provided us was from November. When the budget team reviewed revenues early in January, we were skeptical that their estimate of income tax was a bit too pessimistic. So they've come around in they've caught up with us because it didn't fit our trend. Our trend was much better than what they were predicting back in November. So the newly released numbers just this past week are catching up with what we're seeing, at least in our experience. So on a positive note, the numbers you see in this plan will be better to the tune of about $250,000 on the revenue side. So that's certainly welcome news and helps close the gap that we'll see a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, sales tax. I've got several slides on this. It could have been much worse. Our current estimates project, when I say 1% sales tax, I mean our base sales. Again, for our new trustee, the village and all municipalities in Illinois receive 1% of the state's base sales tax rate of 6.25%. So that when I refer to 1% sales tax, that means the base sales that every municipality gets. So I'm saying we're projected to finish this year about 1.7% below budget and about 2.6% below last year's actual. What I do each year is I look at the detailed sales by all businesses, and I did that for the last 2 full calendar years. Again, a calendar year doesn't coincide with a fiscal year, but it does give you a good sense of how things are trending in 2 consecutive 12-month periods. So I'm looking for trends and trying to draw some inferences as to how our businesses are faring through all this. During that period, total sales taxes declined by 6.2%. I looked at our top 25 businesses, and those top 25 businesses make up about 2/3 of every dollar we receive in sales taxes. The top 25 businesses declined by a much lesser rate of 2.2%. So that tells me the largest businesses in town in aggregate are fairly robust and solid, on solid ground. The top 10 are exactly the same 10 businesses specifically in both calendar years 19 and 20. So there's no movement there, some stability. We did, and we talked about this last year, in the top 25, we lost 3 of those. Those are Aldi, Ditch Witch, and Plated. Those 3 losses weighed very heavily into that 6.2% overall decline. Our top 25 businesses are actually also in generally favorable sectors. Our grocers, our home improvement stores, and our auto sales performed significantly over 2019 during calendar 2020, of which 75% was under pandemic positions. And again, the pandemic has disproportionately affected other sectors, and small businesses and restaurants got clobbered. I'm preaching to the choir, you all know that. So that's where the largest hits have been. But by and large, our core for sales taxes is quite strong. It could have been a lot worse. We are expecting growth and significant growth into fiscal 22 on 3 fronts. I am estimating a 2% recovery in base sales, just as we try to transition away from deep shutdown, deep lockdown into a more open environment. The timing, obviously, of COVID vaccines, it's anybody's guess, but the more shots you get in people's arms, the closer we get to the finish line on this. We're also including in those projections, new projections for new initiatives. The project at Schmale in Geneva, it's covered in snow right now, but we hope to see a 7-Eleven gas station and convenience center there opening within the fiscal year. And of course, Dunkin' already open, and Jet Foods right on the doorstep of opening any day now, I hear. So those are positive shifts on the economic development front. And then the last one is this leveling the playing field for Illinois Retail Act, which began January 1st, 2021. And I will do you all the favor of not reading this to you or getting into great deal. I just pretty much included these slides for background. There's going to be a little bit of a leap of faith in terms of our projections from this act. And here's how I laid it out for fiscal 22. Including our regular 1% home rule, our sales tax, our home rule sales tax, and our local use tax. Between all three of those revenue sources, I'm projecting $1 million in growth, 7.6% over our estimate for fiscal 21. What we're being told by this leveling the playing field is what we're going to see a decrease over time in the local use tax. Remember, that was the super hot revenue that we started off with. But what we're going to see is a transition from remote retailers now having to pay Illinois sales tax, not local use tax. Local use tax is distributed to all municipalities in Illinois based on population. So it's not based on what happens in Carroll Stream, it's based in aggregate what comes over state lines from remote retailers. So there, if I'm going to get a 25% hit on this, and IML's range was between 25% and 50%. So we started with the more conservative figure of 25% hit. This $437,000 just basically gets transferred from this line up to the 1% sales tax line. And then doubles, because now under the new law, our home rule sales tax rate would apply to those sales as well. So we should see a significant boost in revenues from that act, again, as well as general improvement in the economy and the new retailers coming on board. So that was all fairly convoluted, but I think there's some room for optimism into next year. And these three revenues alone represent 50% of every dollar that funds general fund operations. So obviously when we say shop Carroll Stream, we mean it. It really matters. Okay, moving on. The only other one I had some comments on are the state sales tax. I already kind of covered that the Springfield took a pass on diverting revenues away from municipalities this year. And they're as high as they've ever been for fiscal 21. The last bullet point that says our budget assumes the state will return to a 5% diversion. I have crossed that out, and that's I'm not considering that presently because of the IML estimates that came out. That is not to say that the state won't take action to threaten municipal revenues. So we haven't really talked about it at the staff level, but we've yet to take a final position on whether or not we should accommodate some form of state revenue grab in the budget or not. We're gonna talk amongst ourselves and see what the best foot forward is. Bottom line is, based on some of the solutions we're proposing for the budget, it may be moot. You know, because we're looking at the potential to use some reserves that are present in the fund to balance out some of the issues we see next year. Here are just some of the other revenues that I'm projecting some recovery during 22. They're still below the budgeted amount for fiscal 21. I'm thinking it'll probably take another full fiscal cycle to see these fully return to prior levels, but I am reflecting improvement in all of these fairly significant revenue streams into fiscal 22 as well. Okay, and expenditure requests for fiscal 22. And again, each year we ask every department head to assemble their expenditure budget, their expenditure requests, and what they feel their needs are for the coming year. And we aggregate all those, and we see them in very highly aggregated form on this slide. And again, at a very high level, our initial expenditure projections are about $1 million or 3.5% more than our fiscal 21 budget. So that growth rate of 3.5% is not all that bad considering current labor agreements, and that again, 75% of every dollar spent in the general fund applies to positions and staffing. So in its current form, and again, at a very high level, you're going to see likely a staffing plan that remains very flat into fiscal 22. This budget includes compensation adjustments that reflect current labor agreements in place, while also providing parity with non-union positions, as we have historically observed. And the last point there is it does include the implementation of police body worn cameras. We've had these in the budget off and on over the past several years. And as you know, the bill that the criminal justice reform bill will mandate those by fiscal 25. But that item is included and is part of the budget plan that you will see in greater detail in March. So when we compare our fiscal 21 adopted budget to the proposed budget for fiscal 22, on the revenue side, you're looking at a reduction in revenues by about $500,000. And then I just mentioned that expenditure is going up by about $1 million. You add those two together and we have a current working imbalance in the general fund of about $1.5 million. So what to do about that? So I also draw your attention to the percentage change in each of these. Again, 3.5% on the cost side, not all bad considering, again, what drives costs in the general fund. And here's the outlier again. It's on the revenue side, about 2% drop over the FY21 budget. But I think we really need to take into consideration the FY21 estimate column. When we're talking about, and typically when we're trying to address shortfalls, either in expenses or in revenues, we look at the source of where it's happening and then we respond in kind. But sitting on $3.2 million in surplus funds, we're trying to figure out and finesse a way, how do we get this experience to help out this experience over here in fiscal 22? Which brings us to kind of some of the ideas staff was thinking about in terms of trying to bring all of this into clearer view as we refine the spending plan for next year, again, before adoption in April. So it's a no-brainer in terms of the formula. To balance a budget, you either need to cut expenses, increase revenues, or do some of both. We also kind of have to take stock in what context, what environment are we operating in? So I got to put in here, there's still many unknowns into this coming fiscal year. The pandemic being the largest, the fact that we had an operating surplus really from a one-time revenue, the savings that we've achieved this year in payroll and benefits, not likely. We really can't count on this repeating too much longer. Again, with 25% of staff positions turning over in 3 years, the workforce is getting a lot younger. So this may not come into play as much in future years. And that's kind of brings me, as we kind of bring to a wrap here, fiscal 22 in many respects really just is kind of a transition year to find out what it's going to be, what life is going to be like in 2023 and beyond. And I just threw up a bunch of questions here that I'm not sure anybody really knows the answers to at this point. So we're looking for some time to reassess, basically. And again, I'm suggesting here we might need to dig a little bit deeper into the budget playbook to see what solutions we can bring to bear to result in a spending plan for next year that serves the village's needs, gives staff the tools they need to do their jobs well, and see what happens into the next year. And so on this slide, I talk about a couple of items, some we've deployed in past years. We can consider items that are currently planned for fiscal 22 that we might have the possibility of completing this year, considering we have a large surplus forecast. I list here police car laptop examples. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that is. All the car laptops in the patrol units are in need of replacement. And I will rely on Mr. Talavera and Chief Homer I'm sure they could present the case that says they've been well used and they're definitely in need of replacement. In any event, the cost of that is $188,000. No small cost indeed. What we have done, our current year existing budget, in order to smooth the impact of that $188,000, we budgeted $94,000 in this year, and we budgeted $94,000 next year. The plan being, we would purchase half of the laptops very late in the fiscal year, say April, and we purchase the remaining new laptops in May, the new fiscal year. So a suggestion is, we know we need them. Why don't we buy them all this year? That provides relief for next year and draws down from surplus funds in the current fiscal year. Another potential strategy would be drawing from available reserves in our risk management and health insurance pools. IRMA is the risk management group. For many years, we've actually used some reserves on a small scale basis to normalize our annual premiums to that risk management agency. If you look at the budget detail on line items such as workers' compensation, liability insurance, automobile insurance, those line items are flat year over year. That's because we're using kind of smoothing technique and we're applying some IRMA reserves each year to try and stabilize that expense over the long haul. So there are reserves there that are available that we could call on to help with some of the items that may not be able to be purchased this year, yet are significant in cost, but are one-time or very infrequently purchased items. So, and that actually is in keeping with the financial policies that you'll find in our budget book. Were I to ask you to use reserves to cover payroll expenses, that's a no-no. We obviously need to be able to pay for the day-to-day expenses with day-to-day funds. A couple others I put down there. There's a possibility of looking at suspending the general fund reserve policies because a portion of that surplus will be retained in the general fund, and our policies would dictate that any excesses over the minimum level or the maximum level go over to the capital projects fund. We could suspend that. And then a possibility of a special designation of reserves for dedicated projects. Again, for our new trustee, I think all of the other sitting trustees know about the Emerald Ash Borer Reserve. Very early in or late in the 2020s, or I'm sorry, forgive me, late in the 2000s, the Emerald Ash Borer was a huge problem. We took the opportunity to freeze and set aside $2 million to systematically replace all of our parkway ash trees over many, many years. We had the opportunity to enter into grow agreements with nurseries and get trees cheaper than what our counterparts were scrambling to buy because all of these agreements were in place. And because we put away a special reserve to handle that significant cost. So that's yet another tool that we're thinking about as a possibility to try and get us through fiscal 22. But the bottom line remains, at least in my opinion, we have all the tools we need already to have a robust operating plan for fiscal 22. I do not see the need to seek new revenue sources at this point in time because we have those tools. We just need to figure out how to best apply them. I think the bigger problem comes into play in the next year, fiscal 2023. If we really don't see a robust turnaround and we see things getting out of kilter between operating expenditures and ongoing revenues, we're going to have some harder choices to face, I think, at that time. But really, with all the uncertainty out there, I think what we're seeking is a little bit of buy time in fiscal 22 to keep things going. Certainly try to avoid expenditure growth and contain what we have, to see how this is going to play out, basically. And that, I believe, is the end of what I have for this evening.
And John, this is trustee McCarthy. I do have a question. I'm usually pretty flat out direct. So we ended up with a surplus this year. The final budget number for the coming years, I mean, it's a first run, so that's going to change. Couldn't we just do a single one-time suspension of the reserve policy to take keep some of that surplus into the general reserve, or I'm sorry, the general fund, enough to balance the budget and move on?
In short, yes. I think there are a couple of ways of getting there. Body cameras, we would need to spend reserves to fund. And that's part of the plan. It's important. It's an important part of the plan. But there's some other, another thing that I've spoken with the budget team about is our reserve transfers for equipment. That's an expenditure we can absolutely make this year for next year to smooth things out. And really, all that does is represent a transfer to another village fund. It's not even expending anything. So right. There are a number of different fronts on which we can, address this. So absolutely, good question.
John, can I ask a question?
Of course.
How much is the body cams going to cost us?
I don't have the number in front of me, but I believe the initial cost that given to me by the police department was around $170,000, maybe a few dollars less.
Now,
and that would outfit.
I don't think that there's any of us up here, honestly, that are not in agreement that we absolutely need body cams. I guess my question is, we're in the middle of a pandemic and we have no crystal ball. You're doing an awesome job, by the way. This is an excellent presentation, but we don't have that magic crystal ball. So I'm wondering why in fiscal 22, when we're trying to recover, we're going to make a large expenditure, new expenditure like that is going to present additional expenditures each year after. Why wouldn't we put this off till fiscal 23 when we feel like our budget's going to be a little bit more robust and we can take on a larger expense like that? I mean, and what I'm hoping is that the state will come back and listen to the municipalities about these unfunded mandates. And maybe, because I've talked to a couple of them, a couple of our representatives and senators, and I've asked them for funding for body cams, and they're working on grant programs and whatever. So I'm wondering, is it in our best interest to wait till fiscal 23 to see if Springfield can come in with some kind of funding to help us? Because if we already have a body cam program, we may not qualify for grants. It might be the grants that they come up with might only be for the initial purchase, not the maintenance and the storage and, the hiring of someone to maintain all of that. We may lose out on money, I guess is what I'm saying. So my question is, I 100% support them. I just don't know that buying them during a pandemic is maybe in our best interest financially.
Your point is very well taken, Mary, and it's probably not one necessarily for me to answer, but I think our entire team needs to discuss that. That's great feedback. I'll leave it to that. I'd be happy for anybody else to chime in. This isn't my call necessarily, really at all, but your point is very well taken.
I mean, I like your idea for, we need laptops for our squads right now. I like your idea. Let's get, if we've got the money in 21, let's spend the money in 21. Let's do it in April. So that we don't have something hanging over into 2022, because we may have a situation where the bottom falls out on us again. So I would rather try, and if we've got the money in 21, we've always had that philosophy where we don't spend it unless we have it. We're not going to put ourselves in debt to do it. And if we know that we have this need, I would say my recommendation is, let's take care of it in 21. Let's push off body cams to 23 and see if maybe the state does come through with some kind of funding. Or maybe even the federal government might come through with some kind of grants.
You know,
Yeah, that's great feedback. Thank
yeah,
you.
We're not asking for a decision on individual items at this point. Our plan was to bring back some recommendations to you at the next board meeting. And then we'll have the justification why we think it would be appropriate to purchase them in this fiscal year. The reason I'm not confident about additional funding is the state is in dire economic straits. They have been for a long time, and I don't see them digging out of that hole in the near future. They did stipulate, originally there was a provision in the crime bill overhaul that municipalities would be penalized if they didn't purchase body cams. Then they switched it to municipalities that participated in the body cam program would get grant funding. So I'm hoping that will be a consideration in the future for municipalities that already have them, or that are paying for the storage, which is an ongoing larger cost. That's about 70 grand a year. So we've talked in our budget meetings with the budget team and with police. I think they feel confident with body worn cameras. It'll help them out, I think, more than
Absolutely.
anything.
I'm just looking at the dollars and cents of
Right,
it. That's
yeah.
really all I'm looking at.
It's not a dollar amount that's going to go away, though. Yeah. So, and with all the other municipalities that are looking at body worn cameras, it's going to be hard to get. So I think the sooner we act on it, the sooner we'll have them. And if something happens, it'll only help us. We know how good our officers are. This will just be further justification. A lot of times we'll get somebody that says that our officers acted rude. We go back and look at the
Right.
car cameras, and it's totally.
Well, we're
unwarranted.
also ahead of a lot of other departments where we have in-dash cams now. Other departments are still playing that catch up.
Yeah.
And what I liked is, like, when we were looking at our TASER program, we did it the right way. We took our time. We actually found a way to have it funded.
Right.
So that's where, I guess, where I'm coming from is there a way to do something similar with this big, large expenditure? That's my only, off the top of my head.
Sure.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
What is the legal requirement for when we have to have this?
2025. There's no penalties for it. The penalty is you wouldn't be allowed to get state grant money for it.
Which for us is actually a pretty large penalty.
Yeah. Well, it would be for anybody because.
Well, I'm strictly looking at us, and we get quite a few grants. So if we were to lose
Right.
out on those grants, that's big
Yes,
dollars.
Yeah, we do get a lot of grants from IDOT and the state for traffic enforcement.
But I will say for the record, I would like to see that budget expenditure for next year come down a bit. That's a pretty big jump in when we still don't know exactly what that next year is going to bring. I mean, we still don't even know what this year is going to, the rest of this year is going to bring. So I just hate the idea of raising it to the point.
Yeah.
I'd rather be way conservative and go back and be able to look at things in a positive light than take a big chunk and then all of a sudden in 6 months be sitting here saying, okay, what do we cut?
Well, I have my concern, and I'm going to tell you how I feel. One incident that we might have where by not having a body cam puts us in a bad position worries me. We have the money. I'm not saying we should go ahead and do it. I think we have to have more conversation. But I think we have to take a look at it. We have an excellent police chief and police department we rave about all the time. I'd like to get more in depth with them and how they feel and what safety precautions it would give to our police officers. Everything that they could have to help protect them against someone accusing them of something that they didn't do, and having it on film might make a world of difference when the lawsuit comes, or when the terminations come, or when the questions come. And I think that's really what we're looking at body cams for. We're not looking at body cams because we want to spend the money. We're looking at them to save the police department and to save the village of Carroll Street. Now, that's my opinion. And we have the money. We're sitting on a budget reserve. We can push it out to 2022, 2023, I have a thing about kicking it down the road. Maybe then we won't have the money and there won't be any money. If anybody thinks we're going to get money from the state of Illinois, is when they're $150 billion in the hole, makes it, I get excited about them giving us anything, let alone money for something that we have money to spend. So I just think we need to take a good look at this. This is a good expenditure. If the laptops are excellent expenditure, I mean, again, it gives our police department the tools that they need to work with to provide safety for the people of Carroll Stream and for them. That's important. So that's where I'm coming from.
Can I ask another question? Yes. $385,000. Can you be specific about what's included in that? Is the deputy chief in there? 2 new officers?
I'm sorry, I missed half the question.
Okay. What page is that? 32. Page 32, the budget expenditure requests. I'm just curious what the 380 including, because I know we're missing 2 openings for police officers. I presume that that's what's in there. I know you don't want to be too specific. I'm just curious.
I'm sorry, I'm just getting to page 32. And we're talking about the
Personal services line?
yes, the $385,000 increase,
Yeah,
2.9% budget to budget, right?
yeah.
And that reflects all current positions budgeted for a full year. So we typically always budget everybody that's in the org chart fully. And in most years, we actually wind up spending close to 97, 98% of that figure. This year's a bit of an anomaly. We're probably going to come in at 94%-ish, which is still a large number, but payroll being the largest expense, significant savings this year. So the 2.9% is an amalgamation of contractual increases, step increases in those contracts, as well as non-union pay adjustments.
Okay, so I hear you saying that if it's on the org chart, it's budgeted, whether it's filled or not by a body, you're still budgeting for it.
Correct, but typically we wouldn't put money in the budget if it wasn't intended to be filled. So we typically don't just let positions fund positions and not hire them. But this year has been a bit of an exception. With a new chief, there are a number of vacancies. I think Chief Homer came in August, so has needed some time to review, obviously get acclimated with staff and make some determinations.
Okay, so we are budgeting for positions that we're still to fill.
Correct.
Okay. My reluctance on the thing that, you guys hear me?
Not really.
Not really.
You're a little muted. You're far enough away. You can,
You can take your mask.
when you're asking a question.
My own reluctance on Zaloni's suggestion about just buying the laptops all at once is that it kind of commits us a couple of years down the road when those new laptops begin to fail as well. 2 years, it kind of commits you that they're all going to have the same mean time between failure, the same longevity. So then 2 years or 3 years, whatever their life expectancy is, we'd have to do the same thing and replace them. So if we were to buy half of them this year, and like they're budgeted this year and next year, At least we're not replacing them all at once. We're not forced into that position in a couple of years of having to replace them all.
Can we ask Mark this question? Mark, are we, when we do, well, what, if I understood what John was saying is we have an opportunity and we budgeted where we would purchase half of the expenditure technically in one fiscal year, which would be April, and then May, the other expenditure, so it would be in another fiscal year. It's still the same purchase. It's just, we're just taking it from one pot of money in 1 month and another pot of money in the other month. But are we looking at making, I mean, are we changing out the entire fleet of laptops all at once?
Yes, we'd be switching out the entire fleet of laptops. The average life cycle of laptops is 5 years. So we keep them in service for 5 years. We try to do it all at once or span it over a couple of fiscal years, because that way we can get the same model of laptop and same docking equipment. And so that makes managing and maintaining the laptops in future years much easier. So we can swap out laptops from car to car as they start to fail, or we have replacements that we can put into cars. And we can keep vehicles in service for a longer period of time with more efficiency. That's why we do it that way.
So technically, we can still do that because the purchases are all being made towards the end of the fiscal year. You could still break them up, one fiscal year.
Well, I can see from what is responsible, that they plan on doing that.
Yep, yeah.
It's more prudent to do that. So I see that, okay.
I think trustee Garvey made an excellent point. It's similar to what we did with the, when we changed out all of the meters for the water meters. Rather than trying to do them all at one time and spending $2 or $3 million, we took a year and a half, and we're still getting them done. But they won't all quit at one time. But those are a little different than laptops would be. That gets a little more confusing. But it's an excellent point.
So just to clarify, what the recommendation is that we use a combination of different options. We'll continue to review the budget expenditure requests and make cuts where we think is appropriate. And we'll bring those forward and let you know the items that we're considering cutting, as well as some revenue options to fund current fiscal year and then moving forward in the next fiscal year. We'd bring a budget amendment to the village board at the next board meeting on items that we feel could be justified and purchased this fiscal year to draw down next fiscal year's budget.
Correct.
Sounds good.
Yes.
Good, excellent job, John. Thank you. I know it's hard when you're putting numbers together that you're working like with ghost figures, but thank you for all you've done, and thank you for doing it from your home.
Well, thank you.
Get this done. So, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Moved by trustee McCarthy and seconded by trustee Frizzaloni.
Roll call, please.
Trustee Garvey.
Aye.
Trustee Zalek.
Aye.
Trustee LaRocca.
Aye.
Trustee Giesner.
Aye.
Trustee Frizzaloni.
Aye.
Trustee McCarthy.
Aye.
Stay safe, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. You too, Mr. Mayor.